There's a kind of change that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with scandal, headlines, or dramatic moments. It arrives quietly in posture and pauses, in the way someone listens more than they speak. That is the change longtime viewers have sensed in Rick Harrison. For years, he appeared grounded, confident, and unmovable behind the pawn shop counter. He spoke with certainty, negotiated with ease, and carried himself like a man who understood exactly where he stood in the world. But something has shifted. Not outwardly, not obviously, but deeply. The confidence now feels heavier, as if it must be carried rather than owned. This is not the story of a celebrity losing relevance. It is the story of a man whose life has outgrown the systems that once kept him safe. Rick Harrison's mindset was shaped long before fame arrived. As a child, he lived with serious health challenges that forced him out of school and into isolation. Books became his classroom, history became his escape. Later, when his family faced financial collapse, Rick learned that security could disappear overnight. Those experiences didn't teach him hope. They taught him control, work hard, stay prepared, never assume tomorrow will be easy. The pawn shop was not just a business, it was protection. Every deal was proof that logic could beat chaos. For decades, that belief guided him. It worked, but survival strategies are not designed for peace, they are designed for endurance. When Pawn Stars premiered, it captured Rick at a moment when everything aligned. The shop was stable, the family worked together, the routine felt solid. Television didn't create that reality, it preserved it. For 16 years, viewers saw the same Rick Harrison, unchanged, reliable, consistent. But real life continued moving forward. Fame froze his public image while his private life evolved. That disconnect slowly grew uncomfortable. The man behind the counter was expected to stay the same, even as the ground beneath him shifted. When the show ended quietly, without ceremony, it didn't just remove a job, it removed a structure that had defined his days for nearly 2 decades. The global shutdown brought more than financial pressure. It broke rhythm. Las Vegas slowed, tourism dropped, and the shop lost the constant energy that had fueled it for years. Rick kept the doors open, paid his staff, and absorbed the loss without complaint. That wasn't pride, it was fear. He remembered losing everything once before, but this time effort wasn't enough. No amount of discipline could restore certainty. And when routine failed, silence crept in. Silence gave space for thoughts Rick had avoided for years. The death of Rick's father, Richard Harrison, changed everything beneath the surface. To the public, the old man was a sharp-witted presence. To Rick, he was a partner, a teacher, and a witness to every early struggle. They rebuilt their lives together. When Richard passed away after a long illness, Rick lost the one person who fully understood where it all began. He kept working, he kept filming, but something essential was gone. The shop no longer felt shared, it felt empty. Rick believed staying busy would keep grief manageable, but life didn't slow down to allow that. Pressure continued, responsibility increased. The shop demanded attention even as its meaning changed. Control became harder to maintain. The more Rick tried to hold everything together, the heavier it felt. When a legal dispute involving Rick and his mother became public, it added another layer of strain. Private family matters turned into public discussion. Rick chose silence, not because he had nothing to say, but because some conflicts cannot be explained without causing more damage. Regardless of perspective, the emotional toll was real. Trust fractures hurt more than criticism. Nothing in Rick Harrison's life prepared him for losing his son Adam. Addiction is a long, painful struggle that leaves families feeling powerless. Rick tried to help repeatedly. When Adam passed away, Rick later admitted there is no pain worse than losing a child. This loss didn't arrive with answers. It arrived with questions that never stop repeating. Could I have done more? That kind of grief doesn't fade. It reshapes everything. After Adam's death, people noticed Rick slowing down, not physically but emotionally. Reflection replaced momentum. For a man built on preparation, this loss shattered the belief that effort guarantees safety. Work no longer distracted him. Success felt distant. Not long after Rick lost his mother, there was no public tribute, no statement, silence again. Unresolved relationships leave behind heavier questions than resolved conflict. Closure never came. Over time, the pawn shop itself began to change in Rick Harrison's eyes. What was once a place of focus and purpose slowly became a container for memory. Every display case carried echoes of conversations that would never happen again. Every familiar corner reminded him of voices that were now missing. The counter where he once felt control now held reminders of how much had been lost along the way. For years, the shop helped Rick avoid fear by keeping him busy. Now, it did the opposite. It forced him to remember. Memory has weight, especially when it is tied to physical space. And the longer Rick stayed, the heavier that weight became. The shop no longer represented survival alone. It represented everything that had come and gone while he was standing still. When Corey Harrison chose to step away from Las Vegas, it marked a turning point that went far beyond television. Corey wasn't just another cast member. He was part of the emotional structure of the show and the business. His presence represented continuity, the idea that the next generation would carry the story forward. When that ended, it signaled something deeper. Corey's decision wasn't framed as rebellion or conflict, it was framed as honesty, a choice to live differently. For Rick, that moment quietly confirmed what he had already begun to feel. The world he built could not remain frozen forever. People grow, needs change, and sometimes staying means sacrificing parts of yourself you can no longer afford to lose. Without new episodes fueling constant attention, the shop entered a new phase. It was no longer a destination driven by television curiosity. It became what it had always been at its core, a business that required steady effort and constant presence. For the first time in years, Rick had to experience the shop without momentum carrying him forward. No countdowns to filming, no production schedules, just long days and familiar routines. That quiet revealed something important. The shop could survive without the show, but Rick wasn't sure he could continue surviving inside the same routine that now felt emotionally draining. Stability without meaning feels empty. At first, the idea of selling the pawn shop felt impossible. Letting go seemed like erasing the story of his life. But over time, the idea softened. Selling no longer sounded like giving up. It sounded like protecting what remained. Rick had already proven everything he needed to prove. He had survived illness, poverty, failure, fame, and loss. The question was no longer whether he could endure more, it was whether he should. Sometimes strength isn't about endurance. It's about choosing not to suffer unnecessarily. Discussions of reinvention surfaced quietly. New formats, new ideas, possible reboots, but the energy was different. Gone was the hunger of a man trying to escape uncertainty. What remained was caution. Rick wasn't chasing attention or relevance. He was testing his limits, asking himself whether starting again would heal him or exhaust him further. Reinvention requires belief in the future, and belief is difficult when grief has altered how you see time itself. From the outside, it's easy to assume wealth solves pressure, but grief doesn't respond to numbers. Large businesses demand emotional energy, presence, and responsibility. The same qualities grief slowly takes away. Rick's success gave him options, but it didn't give him peace. The shop still required attention, staff still depended on him, decisions still waited every morning. The reward no longer matched the cost, and for the first time, Rick allowed himself to acknowledge that imbalance. Distance began to look less like abandonment and more like survival. Stepping back didn't mean denying the past, it meant refusing to relive it every day. Rick had spent his life showing up even when it hurt. Now he faced a different challenge, learning when not to, choosing himself without guilt. That choice is harder than it sounds for someone whose identity was built on responsibility. Rick Harrison has always been more than a pawnbroker. He was a reader, a learner, a survivor, a father, and a son. For years, the world only saw the negotiator, but negotiation can't fix grief. Knowledge can't undo loss. What remains is the human being behind the image, learning how to live without the structures that once defined him. Strength doesn't always look like persistence, sometimes it looks like acceptance. Rick's journey has reached a moment where holding on no longer proves anything. Letting go doesn't erase achievement, it honors it. The shop will always be part of his story, but it doesn't have to be the place where he stays trapped inside it. Rick Harrison's story is not ending in failure or disappearance. It is changing shape, quietly, humanly. What comes next may never be as visible as what came before, and that might be exactly what he needs. Sometimes the most meaningful chapters happen after the spotlight fades, when the noise settles, when a man finally chooses to live instead of endure.